All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our summit. I'm really glad you could be with us. I love this venue. I think it's kind of like a tribute to the working entrepreneur. It's a good choice. So this conversation is going to be about communities. There are many lessons to learn from the last 60 years of deployment from the first light water reactors. And we've got a community in Idaho Falls who are getting ready to deploy the first advanced small modular reactor. So we want to explore how the lessons are being applied relative to community engagement. And I've got a panel of very interesting people that I'd like to introduce. So to start with, Mayor Rebecca Casper is the recently re-elected, better than 60% of the vote, good job, Mayor, of Idaho Falls, Idaho, a community of roughly 60,000 residents located in southeastern Idaho. It's the host of the Idaho National Laboratory and the Idaho Falls Chuckers baseball team. So who wouldn't want to be in charge of that community? Next, Doug Hunter is the Chief Executive Officer of UAMPS, the Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems. UAMPS provides comprehensive wholesale electric energy transmission and other energy services on a nonprofit basis to community-owned power systems throughout the Intermountain West, with members in Utah, California, Idaho, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, and Wyoming. And I did a quick count, and those states are the hosts to 21 different minor league baseball teams. So that's good living in UAMPS territory. Professor Hank Jenkins-Smith is the director of the National Institute of Risk and Resilience at the University of Oklahoma. His research focuses on the theories of public policy process, with particular emphasis on the management and mismanagement of controversial technical issues involving high-risk perceptions on the part of the public. And I'll point out that Oklahoma City is the home of the Oklahoma City Dodgers and the fabulous Chickasaw Bricktown Ballpark. That's a name that just makes you want to go there. And finally, Roxanne Brown is the Assistant Legislative Director of the United Steelworkers, an organization with 850,000 employees in the US and Canada. She covers policy issues ranging from nuclear energy to shipbuilding to pulp and paper. Now, bear with me on this one. Marvin Miller, who is the Executive Director of the Major League Baseball Players Association from 1966 to 82, and who negotiated the first collective bargaining agreement between the owners and the players, spent 16 formative early career years with the United Steelworkers. All right, so I have a panel that's very vested in both nuclear technology, in community, and in baseball, and I don't think you could have a more American discussion than that. So let's go for it. So let's start with Mayor Casper. I found that the Livability website calls the greater Idaho Falls region a top spot for millennials, so clearly you're running a nice place. And I'd like you to just talk about why are you pursuing nuclear technology and what's the value to your community?
Well, golly, there's so many things I want to say. I'm excited to be here, and I'm very impressed with Third Way. I've decided that, some kids want to run away and join the circus. I want to run away and join Third Way. But my assignment, I guess, today is to take a look at what's happening sort of in real time on the ground in our community. And this is an ongoing effort. You mentioned that we're, set to deploy a small modular reactor. Well, that's set to deploy in 2026 if all goes well. And we've been working on it. I've been aware of this for 5 years myself. So you add the 5 to the 8, and you start to see that it's you have to pace yourself with your enthusiasm. But what are we doing? We are getting set to deploy that small modular reactor. We are one of 34 communities that are part of the Carbon-Free Power Project, which is a project being developed by UAMPS, and you'll hear more about that from Doug in just a moment. But we have the distinction of being the host for this proposed small modular reactor, or small modular reactor plant, and we're doing that because we need power, and we like the idea of green power. We're right now a hydropower city. We say that roughly our portfolio is with a mixture of hydro, which is the vast majority of our power. You throw in a little wind, and you throw in some nuclear that we purchase, and then there's a little bit of open market stuff that we buy, but we're about 95% green right now. If we were to be able to develop this project, we could be essentially 100% green. I know that there are mayors of cities across the nation who are trying to get to 40%, renewable or 40% green by 2040, and I'm thinking, we're there. And so in that sense, we're doing this because it's important to us to maintain portfolio that we have. There's a lot involved in this, and I'm anxious to talk a little bit more, so hopefully I'll pass the mic now, but I want to answer a lot more.
Great, appreciate it. Next, I've got Doug Hunter from UAMPS, and the mayor mentioned the carbon-free power project. There's 3 legs to that: the energy efficiency, distributed generation, and small modular reactors. And so, Doug, I'm curious, why did you pick NewScale as the chosen technology? And second part, you have a lot of members and community stakeholders. How do you effectively get all their buy-in?
Well, thank you, Todd. Those are really good questions. The NewScale technology was really an easy decision due to the safety and the promise of economics associated with deployment. As you probably well are aware, the West is really being run off of natural gas, and it's very cheap right now. And working with these other communities, we really had to have an alternative that gave them a couple of things. One, a carbon hedge, if you will, or a greenhouse gas regulation hedge in the West. No, you don't get a lot of elected officials that seem to be buying into the anthropomorphic greenhouse gas concepts, but they are worried about regulation. There's no doubt about that, and this gives a hedge. And then the ability to bring this in at a competitive level with combined cycle natural gas at today's gas prices has been very important as we go through. The other thing we've had to really do is educate. Most of these, except for Mayor Casper and those up in the Northwest, really have no nuclear in their portfolio whatsoever. Utah has a history of associated with above-ground testing out of the Nevada test site, uranium mining, things like that, and so it's had somewhat of a negative PR, if you will, and that some of the other states, and so we've had to go through an extensive educational process down the road, not only in how the technology works, how it's going to be deployed, and the values that it brings along.
Okay, great. We'll transition to Hank. Hank, you've worked with the Blue Ribbon Commission on spent fuel disposal, and you study public attitudes about nuclear energy and technology broadly. So what are some of the issues you've seen in other communities or other technologies that should be understood for people who are pursuing advanced nuclear options?
Well, I think, first off, let me say I'm really happy to be here. This is an amazing group of people, and with the potential to begin to break some of the gridlock that has hampered clean nuclear energy for some time. For this to work, mayors need to be able to have sustained support for what they're trying to do to bring in advanced reactors into communities. It's not going to work for investors or regulatory agencies or utilities if that support is intermittent. So what that requires is that we think hard about where we start. Amongst the American public very broadly, nuclear has a bad rap. There's a long history, a lot of imagery that's associated with it. So people begin with a lot of perspectives that are difficult to overcome. We've studied in my group extensively the way people understand nuclear technologies, and the conventional technologies are seen as old, unsafe, dirty, costly, and on the plus side, they're seen as abundant and a variety of other factors. But the fact is that a mayor has to deal with a population, has to convince essentially a population that starts with a variety of fairly dim perspectives about nuclear. The opportunities for advanced nuclear technologies are substantial, however. I mean, the difference between the way people understand small modular reactors and the way they understand large-scale conventional plants is big. And the jump is in exactly those sections of the population that you'd most want to see it: the young, the well-educated. And this is a move, I think, that's going to have to take place. Now, mayors are also going to have to understand that they're operating in an environment where there are competing narratives about nuclear energy. And one of them that's going to have to be confronted head-on is that we don't need it. Very widely promulgated idea that somehow we can renewable our way out of the carbon emissions problem. And very clear compelling, valid stories to that effect are going to be necessary that can penetrate a population and be resilient. Other narratives that are out there, of course, are the ones associated with things like Fukushima and nuclear disasters and the legacy of nuclear waste and what we do about the disposal of that waste. And all of these are things we're going to have to address. We need counter-narratives to those that are so prominent in those communities now. The good news is that they are available, represented by many of the initiatives that are represented here, and we're going to, I think, begin to see a breaking of that logjam, and that Idaho Falls is a great example of where that potential comes from.
All right, thanks. Roxanne? So organized labor has long been a backbone of a skilled nuclear workforce. And so how does an advanced nuclear employer affect families and the life of a community?
Thanks, Todd. And I just want to say that I am very happy to be here today. I didn't realize you were going to go so heavy with the baseball. I feel like I should have said "Go Eagles" in my bio so that you knew that I was a huge football fan. But I appreciate.
Go Phillies.
Go Phillies. I'll take that. All right. You know, one of the communities that Josh didn't mention in his opening remarks, but you know, clearly as being a part of this panel, I think he was including us, is organized labor. But I would really urge Third Way, and I think there has been some efforts over the last 3 years to incorporate more of organized labor into this conversation. But I would really encourage Third Way to make, you know, working with organized labor that fourth piece. Senator Bennett alluded to it in his comments that, you know, workers are a key piece of moving advanced nuclear. We believe strongly that we don't get to our climate goals. I mean, it's been said over and over here, but we don't get to our climate goals without nuclear energy. We believe that. We believe that climate change is the biggest environmental challenge of our time, and we want to get at that. Even unions like ours, industrial unions, where we represent workers in every single energy-intensive industry that you can imagine. We're not just the steelworkers, you know, even though that's our name. We are the largest union in pulp and paper, in aluminum, in cement, in oil. We are literally everywhere. And we believe that we really, really need to get serious about, you know, figuring out how to decarbonize industry and how to decarbonize our society. And nuclear energy is one of the pieces that will get us there. So, you know, I urge Third Way just to continue to have this conversation with us, because we have ideas too, and we would like to share them. You know, we, the steelworkers, represent workers typically on waste cleanup sites. We are basically cleaning up our nation's nuclear legacy. So we are at sites like Piketon, Ohio, and Paducah, Kentucky. And for us, we strongly believe that there is an opportunity to use these existing sites to help reindustrialize. Paducah right now is on a cold shutdown. We don't know when the funds will be available to clean that site up in the future. But once it is cleaned up, there's an infrastructure there that can be used to maybe site SMRs, maybe manufacture SMRs. The same thing with Piketon. You know, they have another 40 years potentially left of cleanup at that site. But there's a huge opportunity there, and over 800 workers who are ready to stay there and continue the work, and their families. To your question about communities, what this means for communities, these are areas of the country that are rural. You all know that. There are not a lot of jobs, especially high-paying, family-sustaining jobs with benefits attached. Things like defined benefit pensions that don't exist anymore. There's an opportunity to keep these jobs in different capacities moving forward for the economies of the state and really our overall economy. So, you know, we want to keep this conversation going. I just so appreciate being here, and hopefully we can keep talking from organized labor.
Great. So one of the things that's interesting, it strikes me over the years, is I've looked at many studies that say you need a balanced portfolio. And I live in a community that says we're going 100% renewable. That's our thing. Well, balanced portfolio you need another set of communities that are willing to do other things. And it's great to see that there are a number of people that want to be that community or part of that community discussion. All right, so we have a few minutes left. Sort of make this the lightning round, and I'll open it up to anyone. But from your perspective, do we need policy changes to help make deployment of nuclear energy policy possible? So I'll start with the Mayor.
That's happening in Idaho right now. We have a couple of bills going through the legislature that are seeking to provide those tax benefits that are needed for industry to be attractive. We have to remember that this is business, that people have to make a living, projects have to pencil, and certainly tax incentives help with that. I imagine there's other policy change that needs to be made as well. One piece that often crops up and it'll be thrown around, I think the senator mentioned it, but we've got to deal with, at some point, the nuclear waste stream that comes from commercial nuclear. There's a part of me as a local that, please don't noise this about, but that resents the fact that I have to answer to that as I'm trying to sell something that's very good for my community, my state, my nation, and my world, and my Congress hasn't solved that problem over the last, several decades. There needs to be a smart answer to that one, and certainly I'm not the one to dictate it, but dang, there's policy change.
That's good word on the street from a mayor. That's excellent. Doug?
I think by far and away having a definition of clean energy that includes a nuclear, like for instance, Senate Bill 100 in California has a 40% portion of the bill that's undefined. I think that should just be defined and have nuclear and large hydro fall right into that definition.
And I would agree. We have for many years supported renewable energy standards at the state level and certainly at the national level. We think, why can't you have a clean energy standard that would include nuclear to help us, get there on the nuclear side? It's clearly helped a lot with renewables in terms of wind and solar, so the inclusion of nuclear would definitely go a long way.
But I think decoupling the back end of the fuel cycle from the front end has been part of the problem with dealing with the waste issue. First off, it creates this narrative, this story that blocks progress on new reactors, but at the same time, it disincentives the nuclear waste management problem. And so rethinking the way we approach nuclear waste disposal is going to be an essential part of this process, and it'll relieve a lot of pressure on mayors who are trying to sustain support for new reactors in their communities.
Great. So Roxanne, I'm curious, you talked a lot about these communities that have sort of a trained workforce and that's ready to go. Do you think we're having enough conversations with those communities around advanced nuclear? Do they recognize it's a possible thing for them?
No. In a nutshell, no. I think the conversations are happening in a vacuum. I think, in the mayor, clearly in your community, that's happening at a broad scale because you're taking that leadership role and you're helping it to happen. But in some of the communities that I mentioned, it's really not happening at a broad scale. And the onus really is on us, those of us who are in those communities, to pull those conversations together. And we haven't done that effectively yet, and we need to.
But I'll tell you, I think I've learned that there's something maybe known as peaking too soon. Again, the senator alluded to a 15-minute detention span. When you're looking at a project that won't go online until 2026, I was excited. I was taking this to our legislators 2 years ago. We bought them lunch, and we had this pre-session, seminar, and they're mildly interested. And then 2 years later, they're starting to vote yes. And then, but until the fruits are more readily available, there's not going to be as much interest.
Got it. So that's great advice. So for you, those in the audience, you can't tell, but we have this little clock that tells us to speak smartly and speak quickly. Speak smartly and speak quickly, and we've just about been as smart and as quick as we can be. So I'd like to thank my panel. Great inputs. I think you've given us stuff to think about over the next year, and appreciate you coming here and participating.